Hello again, and welcome to Denton's Tales. Now, once again, we journey back in time to the world of the Old Norse, to the gods Waskar. And I'm going to talk about a very interesting deity from the Norse pantheon. One who, might not have the great beauty of Freya, nor the strength of Thor, didn't give gifts like Idun with her youth-preserving apples, nor play tricks on people like Loki, but in her own way was totally fascinating and played a most important role in the Norse pantheon, more powerful in some ways than Odin himself, as we shall see. Sadly, she is so often misrepresented and totally misunderstood, seen as the total opposite of what she really is. She is mentioned extensively in the Prose Edda, written in Iceland by Snorri Sturluson, who lived from circa 1179 to 1241 AD, in the poems collected in the Poetic Edda, and in the works of the historian Saxo Grammaticus, 1160 to 1220 AD. Her name is Hel, spelled with one L and no A added on. She was Hel, not Hela, as she is often incorrectly called. Nor did she sprout huge horns out of her head that resembled the antlers of some massive stag while wearing a clinging black catsuit, as the woefully awful Thor Ragnarok movie would suggest. Oh, those Thor movies. Oh, don't get me going on that. But then, why would they get Hel right when they got everything else wrong as well? I have spoken about Hel previously on my former channel, but this is a considerably expanded version of it in 3 parts, and I hope will be of interest to both those who are well acquainted with the great goddess, and she is great, and to those who know little or nothing about her, entertaining one and hopefully enlightening the other. According to Snorri, she was the daughter of the notorious trickster god Loki and the female Jotun or giant Angerbode, and she had 2 brothers, 2 very unusual brothers. Fenrir, a huge savage wolf, and an enormous snake known as Jormungandr, which isn't actually a name as such, it merely means giant monster, and he certainly was that. Her correct full name would be Hel Lokisdottir. She also had a half-brother, a unique half-brother, the 8-legged horse Sleipnir, which her father, Loki, had given birth to while shape-shifted into the form of a mare, following a little hanky-panky with the stallion Svadilfari, which he subsequently gave to Odin. An interesting family. And what an incredible childhood she must have had. After all, how many girls can claim a giant wolf, an even larger snake, and an 8-legged horse as brothers? Family gatherings in Loki's hall must have been, different, to put it mildly. Please don't eat the guests. She did actually have 2 normal brothers, or as normal as anything connected with Loki was likely to be, named Narfi and Voli, sons of Loki by his wife, Sigyn. Yes, Loki had a wife, as well as his romantic flings with Angerbode and Svadilfari. He certainly got around in the romantic sense, though he was not the only Norse god to do so, of course. Freya, for example, didn't become known as the goddess of love and things romantic just by, drawing numbers out of a hat. Oh, no. Freya would have felt quite at home in the 1960s. San Francisco and the summer of love, flowers in your hair, Woodstock, and all that. But as to Hel herself, misinformation and questionable references are very much part of her story, being described in the Poetic Edda as being half normal flesh-coloured and half blue. Now, some scholars translate that as black, but blue seems more likely. Or in other words, being half normal and half corpse-like, presumably that bluish tint seen in recently dead bodies, and to have a somewhat downcast, gloomy appearance, which is hardly surprising if she were half dead. If she were half dead, and I do mean if, which I'll come back to in a moment. She is, however, often depicted by artists in far more extreme ways, half normal and half rotting flesh, dripping maggots, or her head half normal and half a grinning skull, with one arm and a leg being just bone, even deformed or hag-like. I've actually seen her described as hunchbacked and twisted. But where has all that come from? There's nothing in the sagas nor the Eddas to suggest anything of the kind. There is no reference to her actually being ugly or malformed as such, nor to parts of her body being just bones without flesh. Even her strange two-tone skin coloration is only mentioned once, nor is it clear how that was distributed. Artists frequently showing her with her face and body split vertically in two, color-wise, normal on one side and blue on the other, but there's no actual description of that. The Poetic Edda merely refers to the coloration without any further details. One should probably think of her as perhaps a reasonably normal-looking woman with strangely coloured skin, if you go by Snorri, or more likely as just a normal-looking woman in every way, since one would wonder how such a remarkable feature was ignored by almost everyone, being mentioned nowhere else. And of course, Hel is not dead. Oh no. Why would she look even the colour of a corpse when she isn't dead? She was not born dead-looking. She is very much alive. Those in her realm are dead. She is not. Nor would those residing in her realm look particularly dead either, because the Norse Hel, well, that was very much a continuation of life. People eating and drinking, having sex, fighting, doing pretty much what they had done before they died. So even the idea of the goddess taking the form of a corpse to blend in, shall we say, with her subjects, be one of the gang sort of thing, even that idea is ridiculous. Had she done so, she would have been the only one there who looked like that. She'd have stood out like a searchlight in a dark room. And why would she want to look like a mouldy, partly rotting corpse, or even be the colour of a dead body, when she isn't dead? That is a misconception, but it is stated in almost every mention of her and in most works of art. Fortunately, there are artistic exceptions. There is one very fine painting of her, done in 1905 by the German artist Emil Doepler, entitled Loki's Brood. It's the thumbnail to this video, and it shows a young and very pretty Hel, with her mother Angelboda sitting in a cave behind her, and her brothers Fenrir and Jormungandr. That is how she should be seen. Well done, Herr Doepler, for getting it right. The word Hel comes from an Indo-European root, kel, that became Hel in Old Norse, meaning to cover, to hide something. Helmet comes from the same root, meaning something covering the head, so that the name of the goddess may be seen as meaning the one who covers, referring to someone covered as in a grave, a covered place, to be in hell meaning to be buried. And that name, of course, belongs to both the realm of the dead itself and to the ruler of that realm. And that is all she was, the ruler of the realm of the dead. Hel is not the goddess of death, another misconception and misrepresentation, but rather she is the goddess of those who are dead, which isn't quite the same thing, insofar as she had no responsibility for death itself. She did not cause it. She didn't choose how, when, or where people died. She didn't actually kill anyone. She merely looked after them once they were dead. She took care of them, provided for them, and was custodian of the dead. That was all. As I said, goddess of the dead, not death. She is not like the Hindu goddess Kali, for example, armed with swords and wearing a garland of skulls. Odin's orders to her as ruler of Hel were to provide for those sent to her. He said nothing about her going out and getting a few herself just to pass the time on a slow day, nor does she have a quota to make up. I'm 100 short for the week. Have to go out and kill a few people. No, she is not a death goddess. She is a custodian and nothing more. Nor is she evil or cruel. She's not a goddess to be feared. It was death itself that might be feared, not Hel. She did not bring death. You could say death brought her. And in many cases, such as where someone was suffering extreme pain as they neared the end of their lives, Hel would have been seen as a most welcome goddess, the bringer of the end of their suffering, welcomed by the one who lay dying, as well as those around them. But more of that in a moment. There is a popular concept that the Norse gods carried out specific tasks, that they were the god or goddess of something, that they all had a job description, if you like, and they had to follow that. Thor was god of thunder, or Freya was goddess of love, for example, and Hel was goddess of death. But that's not quite true. Norse deities had more of what one would call an association with things, rather than being responsible for them as such. They were more like patrons of them, if you like, but not controlling them as, say, the Greek gods did. Such as when Persephone would go to Hades, there was winter on Earth because she wasn't there to keep it summer. She and her mother Demeter were the summer. Without them, it just couldn't happen. But that wasn't the Norse concept. Things could happen on their own without the gods having to lift a finger. Thor, for example, though his name means thunder, did not have responsibility for thunder and lightning, nor did he control the weather, just as Freya had no control over or responsibility for love. People fell in love without any designated assistance from her, and had she done like Persephone and gone off to chat with Hel for 6 months, nothing would have changed. People would have still fallen in love, had sex, made babies, and so on in her absence. But she was associated with love. She became its patron due to her own, considerable romantic activities. And of course she sympathizes with those who are in love and helps them if need be. And in one poem, Odin actually says that she enjoys love songs and should be prayed to by those in love. But she had no official duty to control love, just as Thor was associated with thunder, but he had no official duties regarding it. And in fact, he is never mentioned in the sagas as doing anything connected with it. Nor had Loki any responsibilities to do with fire. That's pure Richard Wagner opera. And as I said, Hel had nothing to do with death as such. She was simply the custodian of those who were already dead. Loki's offspring initially lived in the home of their mother, in Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. But the gods were not exactly happy when they learned about the curious trio. Now, the two normal brothers didn't bother them particularly, but the wolf and the snake, well, they did. And they were getting larger. And the entire Loki family, of course, were giants. Now, for one thing, giants were not always to be trusted. And the gods were a bit wary of them, despite the fact that the gods often had sex with giants. Some of them even married giants, and they had children with them. Thor, for example, was the son of Odin and the Jotun woman Jord. Odin himself was the son of a Jotun woman, and there were giants even among the gods. Skadi being a Jotun, and Tyr the son of two Jotun parents, which makes him one himself. But the combination of the Jotun wolf and snake and Loki, well, that was disturbing. Actually, the combination of Loki and anything was disturbing, trickery in some form being very likely. And we are told that the gods traced prophecies that great mischief and disaster would arise for them as a result. Consequently, Odin had them brought to Asgard, or Asgard as it is in English, and seeing the increasing size of both of them, he ordered Fenrir bound with unbreakable chains, during which the god Tyr lost a hand. And Jormungandr was sent to what was described as that great sea that lies round all lands. Well, hopefully he wouldn't cause any great trouble. Not that that was very likely to happen, given Odin's own actions, which were really highly abusive, and together with the duties imposed on Hel herself, without her consent, of course, that would come back on the gods later on. Karma is a bitch, as they say. With her two unusual brothers seemingly dealt with, that left Hel. Odin sent her to Niflheim, the realm of mists, giving her instructions and granting her authority over the dead of the 9 worlds, all the dead, instructing her to administer board and lodging to those sent to her. Now, she was not consulted about that, of course. She had no say in the matter, and Odin's instructions were very clear. Hel he cast into Niflheim, and gave to her power over 9 worlds, to apportion all abodes among those that were sent to her, that is, men dead of sickness or of old age. She has great possessions there. Her walls are exceeding high, and her gates great. Now, nothing about her being deformed or dead. The depiction of her as some sort of half-dead, half-living, rotting corpse-like monster, dripping flesh and maggots, started only in the 13th century in Iceland, with the Christian retelling of the old sagas and verbal stories by Snorri Sturluson, and added later to in more recent times, where they began piling on even more lurid descriptions of her, resulting eventually in the totally distorted image of her popular today, though Snorri, of course, contradicted himself considerably, making her a gloomy, unpleasant monster on one page and a caring and welcoming goddess on the other. Her region in Niflheim would become known much later as Helheim, the realm of Hel, though that name wasn't used to begin with. and during the Viking Age, Hel would have been the name used as both that of the place and of its ruler. Since Hel is not actually referred to as a goddess by Odin, merely as ruler of the realm of the dead, nor is she specifically mentioned as a goddess or anything else indeed in the Eddas or sagas, there is speculation about her true status: goddess, demigoddess, or just Queen of Hel. But I'll be looking at that in detail in part 3. There are some very interesting clues regarding her status. I call her a goddess, so we shall run with that for now. Now, the Norse Hel, it was not a place of everlasting fire and torment, eternal damnation, like the Christian version, spelled with 2 L's, but it was really little more than a not at all unpleasant continuation of life, described as having great mansions with high walls and huge gates. It was warm and sunny and green, rather like the spring in Midgard. Flowers grew there, and Hel's high hall was beautiful, a bright and comfortable building where people were served with mead. Nor was it entirely below ground, as the popular concept would have it, since there are references to at least some of it being visible from other locations. And as I've said, the sun is mentioned as shining there. So assuming it was not a special sun just there for Hel, it could not have been entirely underground. Indeed, had it lain entirely in some kind of cavern, but it would hardly have needed a wall around it, would it? It could be reached by going down and to the north, along the Helvega, the Hel Road, crossing over a river by a bridge and continuing on the Hel Road before coming to Hel's Gate. Do you know, in Scandinavia to this day, a polite way, if you like, to tell someone where they can go to is to tell them to go down and north, or in other words, go to hell. When Balder, the son of Odin and Frigg, is killed by the trickery of Loki and he goes to Hel, she welcomes him and his wife, Nanna, who had thrown herself on the funeral pyre with him as a good, loyal wife should do, receiving them with obvious warmth. She's considerate and kind, having the benches strewn with rushes to make them comfortable, and special mead brewed. Not just any old ordinary mead, oh no, special mead, laying on a feast for him, with gold rings everywhere, and he sits in the place of honour at her table, the high seat, which hardly suggests a realm of misery and suffering. People seem to be carried on much as they had done when they were alive, eating, sleeping, playing games, carousing, fighting, and so on. The fact that Hel fed those in her realm, that there was food and drink there, seems to me significant, in that it was clearly there purely for the purposes of enjoyment, not necessity, since, nutrition is hardly required by the dead. You can't really starve to death when you're already dead. And when Hermod goes to Hel to see if he can get Balder back, which I'll be discussing a bit later, we get a very clear impression that Hel was far from a miserable, punishing place, since Balder actually walks Hermod back to the gate. He gives him gifts to take back to Osgardr for his parents. And Nanna also sends back gifts, a robe of linen for Frigg and a finger ring for Fulla. So not only are Balder and his wife clearly not in any great distress, they're not, oh, please get us out of this place. No, nothing like that. And it would seem there must be a gift shop in Hel, since they are even able to obtain gifts in the realm of the dead to send back to the realm of the living. Something very unlikely in the Christian version of Fire and Brimstone. That linen robe wouldn't have done very well in the Christian Hel. But you see, that did not suit the church. Oh no, not one bit. Who regarded heaven as a paradise, fluffy clouds and halos up there, and Hel as eternal torment, fire and brimstone down there. And as we shall see, that led to an increasing adaptation of the Old Norse beliefs, you could say, to a more Christian version, as well as perhaps actual variations in those beliefs over time. Only one Old Norse poem actually mentions anything about punishment of the dead for their crimes, and that is in Walhall, the first poem in the Poetic Edda, thought to most probably date from the time when Iceland was converting to Christianity, which is probably the reason for the story, to bring Hel to a more Christian concept. It is a place that's mentioned that sits on the Northtröðr, the shore of corpses. It is said to be far from the sun, with a gate facing north, to have poison dripping from the ceiling, and snakes encircling the walls, where the monster Nithog will suck the corpses of murderers, oath-breakers, and adulterers, and snap them in his jaws. That's telling you now. Stay away from there. There's no mention of Hel herself regarding this place, nor any role she might play in it, so it's questionable as to her connection with it. But we now come to a most interesting thing. Who among the dead went where? Warriors who died bravely in battle, with weapons in their hands, are carried aloft by the Valkyrie, the Valkyries, to Odin's great hall, Walhall, its name meaning the hall of those slain in battle, or at least some of them were, there to fight, get drunk, and feast with the gods till the final great battle that would end the world, the Ragnarok. But not all the dead were evenly distributed between those who died with a sword in their hand and those who didn't. One lot to Walhall, and all the rest to Hel. Though Hel's realm of the dead was the largest, of course, it had the greatest population, which I suppose is rather obvious. Ron, a sea goddess, was said to take those who drowned at sea, gathering them in with her net, while the goddess Gefn, herself a virgin, took those unwed women who died as virgins. Some people who had distinguished themselves in some way were taken by Thor, while the very righteous who had survived the end of the world, Ragnarok, will go to Gimli, where there is a golden-roofed hall. Freyja is mentioned by the disguised Odin in the poem Grumnarsmal as taking many of the warriors who died in battle rather than their going to Valhall, allotting them seats in her own hall, Sethumnir, which is located in a beautiful meadow in Osgardr called Folkvang. But there are contradictions. Like early in Norse mythology, the dead could go to quite a number of locations, such as those I've mentioned, among others, but later on the choices grew less, and by the time Christians had finished with Norse paganism, it really came down to only two locations. Osgardr up there, and Hel down there, the Christian concept of heaven and hell. A concept that really had no status in pagan beliefs. There was no reward or punishment as such for things done in life. We must remember that a lot of what has come down to us about Norse beliefs has been coloured to greater or lesser extent by those who recorded it, since the likes of the Eddas were written down in the 13th century by Christians, about which I'll have more to say, preserving what had for centuries been verbal tales, pagan tales, recounted by storytellers and poets called skalds, or just told by ordinary people sitting around the fire on long winter nights to pass the time. Though the Norse could write, they had a written language using runes, had they chosen to use it, but they didn't, at least not to write books, using it instead for inscriptions on monuments or on talismans for ornamental purposes. They would put up large stones with inscriptions of the Eric was here, or Håkon went off and died somewhere sort of thing. But they didn't record their history or the stories of the gods in written form, which is a great pity. Because that means we have very, very little that comes directly from their time. The extent of how much was altered or coloured by the Christian beliefs of men like Snorri is hard to say, but there is considerable evidence of Christianization, you might say, particularly in Snorri's prose Edda, though far less so in Saxo's writing, and the poetic Edda seems overall to be reasonably unaltered, though Christian influence is still clearly present. The poems contained in the Poetic Edda are a mixed bag, if you like, a collection of tales by unknown authors from differing periods of Norse history. What Dr. Jackson Crawford, an expert on all Old Norse subjects, refers to as what today we would call the best of, or perhaps an iTunes playlist, which I think is quite a good way of describing it. And they are closer to the originals than Snorri's tale by the looks of it. Variations or contradictions contained in them could well reflect genuine variations in beliefs that occurred over time, as well as deliberate alterations. Saxo's work is also older than Snorri's, and while he mentions many of the same things that Snorri does, there are considerable differences in others. His Christianization of the tales seems to have been far less than Snorri's. In the prose Edda, Snorri retells many of these tales, but adding his own interpretation and explaining them, sometimes seeming to suggest that he was trying to make it look as though some pagan beliefs actually foreshadowed Christian ones, making an acceptable link between the two, and on occasions even contradicting something he said elsewhere, as I mentioned. For example, we read of companies of warriors killed in battle riding the road to hell, not being taken aloft by mounted warrior women to feast in Walhall. Yet at the same time we read that dead warriors went to Ostgarda, taken there by the Valkyries. An early skaldic poem mentions a king who is killed in battle and is then taken by Hel herself to her realm. And in the poem Fafnismál, it is clearly stated that everyone, no matter who they are, goes to Hel, that being the default realm of the dead, which indeed fits Odin's orders to Hel in the first place. So was Hel seen initially as the default recipient for all of the dead, with Valhall being a later conception, perhaps even a change of mind by Odin, who decided to keep warriors in Ostgarda in preparation for the final great battle, Ragnarok, or simply a variation due to either differing or changing aspects of religion itself, or invented altogether, though the latter does seem rather unlikely. One interesting possible clue in regards to that lies in the names given to the wall that surrounded Hel, or at least one of them. It was known as the Norgrinder, meaning the corpse fence, the Helgrinder, or the fence of Hel, and as Valgrinder, which means the fence of the fallen, but the fallen in a very particular sense, since Val meant one who died in battle, specifically a fallen warrior, from which of course we get Valhall, meaning the hall of the warriors slain in battle, as well as Valkyria, the Valkyries, which means the choosers of the warriors slain in battle, from Val and Kyria, which was a feminine form for one who chooses something. So one name from Hel's outer wall seems to imply that warriors did indeed go there, even if only in transit perhaps, for elsewhere. And Saxo mentions warriors fighting and training in Hel just as they were supposed to do in Valhall. There is also mention in one of the sagas of so-called Hel shoes, which were fitted onto the feet of dead warriors so they could walk on to Valhall after passing through Hel, on foot, not borne aloft by the Valkyries, though why they needed them as against their own footwear, well, that isn't stated, which seems to indicate again that everyone went to Hel to begin with, whatever about subsequent destinations that they might be sent to. In part 2, I'll be looking further at the incorrect image of Hel, how it has come about, and those who created it, the inaccuracies and misunderstandings associated with her. So, till then, I should say farewell, goodbye for now. See you in part 2.